I'd like to thank everyone for coming. My name's Susan Erlenwine. I'm the Director of Environmental Resources for Sedgwick County. Some of you may have been at some of the previous town hall meetings a couple of years ago that we had on Hancock Acres, or 4 years or better ago on Peach Valley Estates. So what we'd like to do is discuss groundwater issues in this part of the county. I'd also like to recognize State Senator Dan Kirshen for coming. Dan, if you'd stand. He helped get money for this study, and Commissioner Sarah Lopez, Sarah Wood-Rave, thank you for coming. Now, we're calling this the Southbluff study because it's kind of in the middle of the area that's under study. A lot of people, when they hear about flooding, they think about surface flooding only. And you can see this photo taken on the turnpike south of Wichita. They think of a lot of rain, surface water, and flooding occurring. But there's another type of flooding that occurs in the south part of Sedgwick County, and that has the groundwater coming up from the bottom into people's basements, and flooding occurs. These are pictures from this part of the county. And you can see from the marks on the wall, it went up over 3 feet in the basement, and you can see the mold forming. Here you can see the lines of the flooding at the light switch area. So it's pretty extensive. And on the right here is sand that was pushed up through cracks in the basement floor from the groundwater coming up into the basement, bringing that sand with them. And that sand is part of the problem. It's very loose, it's porous, it's permeable. Groundwater moves through it very easily, and therefore it can go up as well as horizontally through the ground. So people in this part of the county have sometimes 3 to 5 sump pumps in their basement, trying to get the water out of the basement. I've heard pumping of the basement water, 24 hours a day for months at a time to try to get the water out. I've heard horrible stories of $800 a month electric bills from trying to do this. So it's a constant problem, but there's another problem. You pump this, have the sump pump on, it's bringing the water up, and it's going on the surface of the ground. This is in Hancock Acres. You can see the woman's standing in her yard, and the water's up to her ankle. So you're creating a pond on the surface of your land, and either that's going to slowly flow across the ground, or it's going to sink right back in where it came from. So you're kind of recycling the water in the area. So citizens have contacted the county over time and asked about what can we do to help. One request was turning on the Derby water wells, which we've done a couple of times. This gives an example of we paid the electric bill to run the Derby water wells from September through December of 2016. The electric bill was over $21,000. And one of those pumps later, when we looked at it, burned up. So that one didn't work anymore. They've also said, well, why can't the farmers just pump their wells? Well, when you have a lot of rain going and the farmers are pumping the wells, they don't need to pump at that time. They need the water when it's dry, not when it's raining. And the state has permits for water wells. And if you're what we call dewatering, which is pumping to just get it out and not irrigate, they would need a special permit from the State Division of Water Resources, along with their normal permit to irrigate. And asking us for help, we funded 2 groundwater studies in the past. This would be the 3rd one. And let me say what we're looking for is if you look at the elevation of the house and assume an 8-foot basement, from those pictures you know the water went up at least 3 feet, sometimes 4 feet into people's basements. What is the basement elevation compared to the surface? What is the normal water table, and how much rain would we need to lift that up to go into the basement? And better yet, what would we need to pump it down to get it under the basement? And also, everyone in this area, unless you're on Derby water, have private water wells. So you don't want to pump the water so much that you lower the water table below people's drinking water wells, and all of a sudden they don't have any water. Looking at the sand from that photo earlier, you see that it's very fine grain. Sand is loose, the water can move through it easily. That's called porosity when you have a lot of voids. Permeability is the ability of the water to move through it, and it moves through very quickly in this area. And clay is very tight. It doesn't move water through, but unfortunately this area has a lot of sand, so the water comes up into people's basements very easily. Now sometimes the clay forms a barrier down lower and the water can build up above it, pushing it up into the basement. So if a well is drilled into the ground, it's intersecting the water table, which is the top of the groundwater. Water moves horizontally through the ground. In our area in Sedgwick County, groundwater mainly moves from the northwest to the southeast through the county. So it's moving horizontally. As it rains, the water table will go up, and during droughts, the water table will go down. When you have a pump in the ground pumping the water, it forms what we call the cone of depression. Now, if you've used a straw in a drink and you look at the bottom of the straw as you suck up, you'll see a little cone around the bottom of the straw. Same thing's happening on a larger scale here in the ground. Oops, sorry, hit the wrong button. Well, when it pumps and forms that cone of depression, the question becomes how wide horizontally does that stretch? So a lot depends on the thickness of the sand, the permeability of the sand, how fast the waters can move through it, the size of the well and the size of the pump. In this diagram, you can see your neighbor's house going dry because it dropped the water table below the bottom of their well. That's what we don't want. We do not want to cause harm. We don't want this situation to happen. And I know from experience, I've had farmers call and say, my well went dry, and it's because my farmer next door pumped so much water out, it pulled the water down below my well. And this does occur on large scales as well as within neighborhoods. So the trick is, if you want to lower the water table by using a dewatering well, you need a trigger kind of like the sump pump in your basement. When the water comes up into the hole that the sump pumps in, it turns on, right? It lifts it, it pumps, and then when it drops, the pump turns off. You need to do this inside the wells, so you have monitoring wells letting you know when the water table is going up. It triggers electronically for this well to turn on. When the water hits a certain height, the well turns off. So you're not getting the water so low that it's going to make a water well go dry. This is a map showing how well the water can be transmitted through the ground. And the key here is the larger the numbers, the better it happens. We've got an area up here in the northwest part of the county, and down here where we're at right now, where the water can go very quickly through the ground. So what we're calling the Southbluff study area is from 71st Street South at the north end of it, the interstate on the west side, the county line on the south, and the Arkansas River and the Mitch Mitchell floodway on the east side. In the past, we've done 2 studies. One was Peach Valley Estates, which is over here. and the other one is Hancock Acres right over there. But instead of doing a lot of small studies like that, it was better to look at a larger area. Now I mentioned we've done these studies, I just want to go into that a little. This is a blow-up of what it looks like at Peach Valley Estates, homes on large lots. We hired Bob Vincent with Groundwater Associates. The Division of Water Resources for the state considered Bob the best hydrologist in Kansas. Unfortunately, Bob's passed away recently, but he did the hydrology study for us, and he looked at the fact that we'd need 3 dewatering wells in Peach Valley Estates. Also notice these circles around it, that's showing how many feet the water table would drop after pumping for 30 days. So you can see if you had a home close to the well, it would drop faster than if your home was further away. And that's something the study needs to take into consideration so that when the wells turn on, everyone will not have water in their basement, not just the people right next to the wells. Then you have to get rid of the water. You don't want to just dump it on the surface like those photos I showed earlier with the sump pumps. What you want is to have piping to take the water out. So remember, there's the 3 wells. You need a 4-inch pipe up to this well, but now that you're adding more water, the pipe size has to increase to 6, and then there's a 24-inch going down. It's collecting water now from that one, going out of the area and south, and it would have gone over along the interstate down to the Cascade Creek. 1.77 miles. That's where the cost came in. You had the cost of drilling the wells and getting the computerized so that it pumps well, that it pumps come on and off at the appropriate time, but then you got to get rid of the water. And where do you take it? So Peach Valley Estates, we had hired PEC, a consulting company, professional engineers, that performed the study in 2017. The cost was $22,500. There are 155 lots there. Principal cost per lot was $2.1 million to put in the wells and all of the pipes. And this, remember, is 2017 dollars. Not the money today, which might be frightening. And you look at getting a bond to pay that over 20 years, assume 4% interest on the bond, it would have been $83 per lot per month for 20 years. And then you need an improvement district to pay for settings, I would say for a rainy day, but set aside money so that when the pump wears out, you need to pay the electricity for running the pumps. You have some money set aside to do that. And that was $40 a month. In Peach Valley, we presented this to them to create a benefit district, an improvement district. You need 50% of the residents or landowners to agree to that, and they did not. So this never took place. So let's go from Peach Valley Estates over here. This is hydraulic, by the way. And let's go over to Hancock Acres, right there where the big ditch meets the Ark River. And you can see it's also near a surface 100-year floodplain. That's the blue area. So here's Hancock Acres. And looking at this table, you can see the house elevations. It's extremely flat. The average is 1,251 feet above sea level. Maximum was just 2 feet more than that. Minimum was at 1,248. So not much change. It's a very flat area. So as it rains, that water's going to sit there and soak into the ground. Then the frightening thing to me is you look at adding a basement under those, and then the water table level when the wells were drilled, that maximum is higher than the minimum well, basement elevation, I mean. So some of those wells that I looked at with Kansas Geological Survey were very shallow for the house wells, and they weren't much deeper than the basements. So here's a unique problem where you have to make sure no harm's done by keeping the water out of the basement and yet not letting the well go dry. This had different scenario of shallower wells, but there were more of them. The wells are in blue and the monitoring wells are in red. And then the green, it may be hard to see with the lights on, but the green is taking the water out and up to the north. Cost of the study, $31,800 in 2019. 99 lots in the area, much less than Peach Valley Estates, which means even though that principal cost per lot was $1.6 million instead of over $2 million, it's more per lot because there were fewer lots. So that was $18,000 plus, and paying for 20 years, 4% interest on the bond would be another $112 per month per lot. And again, the improvement district setting money aside for the future pump replacement. This did not get 50% of the vote either. So this was never implemented. So now, bringing us up to date, Kansas Water Office has dedicated research funds, and they gave us money to do the current study, to look at this larger area of dewatering or any other options for that larger area I had earlier. And again, we're working with PEC, who's also working with the city of Derby on their water wells. And so they have a lot of background information. So again, this much larger area is under study. We don't have homes everywhere. Sometimes it's just farmland, but sometime in the future that land may be sold to put in a subdivision. I asked the county clerk for information on this area and the number of parcels in Peach Valley, Hancock Acres, but in that whole area you can see 155, 99, and 1,288. So there's a lot of landowners in this area. That doesn't mean it's all developed, or each one has a home, or each one has a basement. But this is just data from the clerk's office to help us see that we've only looked at a small portion so far compared to the overall area. So the Southbluff study is different from the other two because it is a larger area. We've been using a citizen committee and having meetings to discuss if are we on the right track and getting input. And when you came in, you may have received comment cards. We want input from you as well as to questions you have or comments. And I'll have a website at the end of this presentation where you can do it on the web as well. We are incorporating the existing data from the Peach Valley Estates, from Hancock Acres, and also from Derby and what they're doing with their wells. So we're incorporating future Derby water wells, and we're trying to determine, are there better dewatering locations? Where would those be located to help the most citizens? Options for removing the water. In the past, it's always been Cowscan Creek or the Ark River. What about building a local lake and putting the water there? So that option is on the table as well. Then we need to determine the cost for all of this. So considerations, basement flooding due to groundwater has been around here since the early 1980s. We've talked to landowners, and when did you first have flooding in your basement? In the early 1980s. That's when Derby wells were pumping just fine. There were 11 wells pumping until 2002 when Derby signed a contract with Wichita. Derby had hard water, and they wanted better water. Citizens had asked for that. So they signed a contract with Wichita, but Wichita said, we're going to supply 100% of your water. You cannot use your wells. Well, those wells were acting as local dewatering wells, but only affected a small area around those wells. The cone of depression may be extended to 0.7 of a mile after pumping for 60 days. How do we know this? Well, there have been several people who have studied this. Dr. Andrew Swindle from Wichita State University teaches hydrology there. He looked over all of the different formulas used for the pumping rate that they were pumping the Derby wells, the hydrology of the area, and came up with 0.5 mile to 0.7 of a mile radius from the wells. So it doesn't reach out very far. And Bob Vincent, who I mentioned earlier from Groundwater Associates, studied what they call wells number 10 and 11 for Derby down on South Hillside, about 95th Street South. Okay. And those are the two well locations. The yellow dots are homes in that area, and the circles are indicating how far out it reaches after pumping. I don't know if you can read it or not, but the green out here is after pumping 700 gallons per minute for 60 days straight. That green area will drop 1 foot. The blue area here is 2 feet after pumping 60 days. Then you have the red is 3 feet, this inner blue is 4 feet. So homes here near those wells would have benefited from the wells pumping, but as you move out from it, you don't have the benefit. And that's why localized dewatering wells is what's important to determine where to put them to do the best good, what size should it be, the pump, and also the rate. All of that is important. That's what the study's about. Now I'm going to hand this over to Nicole from PEC, and she's going to review. They've been studying this up to now. We're not done with the study yet. I plan on another town hall meeting when we're done so you can see what the final study looks like. But this is informational and we want input from you. So Nicole, if you could look at that.
Hello, like she mentioned, my name is Nicole Franken. I'm with PEC, and I am the project manager for the Southbluff dewatering study. I also worked on the Hancock Acres study somewhat, and I'm also helping manage the Derby project that they're going to be working on those wells and looking at a new water treatment plant. So very familiar with this general area. So talking through what we've done with the study so far, we are working with hydrogeologists from SCS Engineers, another local engineering company, and they've been doing the bulk of the work so far, just gathering data. So preparing a conceptual site model of the entire study area, pulling in surface elevation data, looking at the geology from well construction logs throughout the whole area, looking at climate data, so the rainfall, the stream flows, etc., to get a picture of what this whole study area looks like whenever the water comes up in the river and the water goes down in the river, over all the historical data that we have. We also have incorporated some recent data from Derby's wells. We did some testing on them within the last year, specifically those wells 10 and 11 that Susan was pointing out earlier, to evaluate the capacity of those. So we passed that along to SCS Engineers to incorporate into the model, and they're working on calibrating the model right now to a USGS data set. So this figure kind of shows you all of the data that they have in the area to model the geology with. So a good chunk of the data is within the Hancock Acres or other neighborhoods where domestic water supply wells were constructed, and they were able to pull those logs from public records and put them into the model. So we have a pretty good representation in the model of this entire study area. There's a few areas that we don't have data, but there's not that much of a change through the area. So it's hard to see, but there's a cross section from here to here, right here, showing the geology, and the bulk of it is all sand. I think this area is generally where Hancock Acres is. So there's a little bit of gravel and shale in that area, but for the most part, it's just a ton of sand. So we feel like we have pretty good data for this entire area at this point. One thing to note is, every driller logs differently, so there is some variation. Somebody taking a boring might note the depth of sand a little bit differently than other geologists. So, but overall, since we have so much data, we feel like it's a good representation. Next, we're going to work on simulating high flow conditions within the river. We're going to simulate drought conditions. And then we're going to add groundwater withdrawals to simulate efforts needed to maintain the water levels within that sweet spot between where it'll keep it out of basements but not impact water supply wells. So that's what the model will give us, is kind of showing us where we want to target that and how much water and at what points we need to withdraw to make that happen. From that, we'll be able to provide visualizations of the impacts of the withdrawal, and we haven't gotten to that point yet, so I just provide an example of an output. You can see here there's some wells and there's some drawdown in this area that's a little lower than the outside areas, kind of like Susan was talking about the cone of depression. When you add a bunch of wells together, then you get kind of a bigger area that you're dewatering. So we'll be able to provide in the next town hall meeting visualizations of what we're proposing will look like in a 3D model. After that, we'll take that conceptual design, the withdrawal amounts and locations, and do conceptual design of infrastructure for those, and evaluate the impacts on a receiving water body. I'm leaving that pretty vague because we're going to look at similar to Hancock Acres and Hancock Acres, discharging to the Ark River, potentially discharging to a lake. There's plenty of things that we're going to look at to try to get a feel for the best option once we get a better picture of what's needed to dewater the area. After that, once we kind of get an idea of what the infrastructure will look like, we'll look at right-of-ways, utilities, et cetera, to kind of figure out the best routing for any piping or other infrastructure required. And then we'll dig into the permitting requirements. So, if you get too close to a floodplain, you have DWR permitting, for example. There's other permits that we'll have to look at. So, giving a thorough review of everything that will be required for the project. And then we'll estimate construction costs and ongoing operation and maintenance costs. So, okay, do you want me to go back? Slower. Okay, I will try. I don't speak in front of large crowds very often, so I'm sorry if I'm talking a little too quickly. Did you have a comment as well?
They said they had 0.7 distance on the dirt wells. Did they take into consideration the parks that being on at the same time, just north of 95th, south of 130? It's just those two. So it's just the dirt wells. With those two on, it was down.
Gotcha. So for future considerations, future Derby supply wells, we're planning right now to keep the wells 10 and 11, and I'll show you a figure and point out where those are on the next slide. There's a new contract between Wichita and Derby that was just established. They signed it, I think, last year to have Wichita provide the majority of Derby's water. So Wichita will supply 90% of Derby's water, the 90% of the winter use. So December, January, February, March, I think it is. The average of those months, 90% of that is what Wichita will supply all year round. And then Derby will provide 10% during the winter, and then the remainder of what's needed for the rest of the year. So what we call more of like a peaking demand. They're going to cover that. So the majority of the water that Derby will be supplying will be during the summer months, the peak usage time frame during the summer when it's the most dry. So not necessarily when you're going to have a lot of water, a lot of rain, because there's not going to be as many people irrigating with their lawns, and you won't need as much water supply during those times. We're also anticipating 3 new wells to replace the rest of the Derby wells. We're currently evaluating locations for those 3 wells, so that's work in progress. All of the wells combined are limited to 694 million gallons per year, and they can only pump at a rate of 2,500 GPM total, based on their water appropriations through the Division of Water Resources. And wells 10 and 11, those furthest south wells that Susan was pointing out earlier that were tested as part of the effort to figure out the cone of influence, are limited to 700 GPM. So this figure shows all of Derby's current wells. These 2 down here, wells 10 and 11, we are currently planning to keep. And then the rest of these wells will be abandoned and replaced with 3 new wells. So that is our current plan. I should note too that when I say existing wells, these wells don't currently have pumps in them since they've been inoperable for so long. The pumps have been taken out, and it's basically just a well. There's no other infrastructure with it right now.
I have a question. Where are you gonna pump this water out? Where are you gonna pump it?
That's something we'll be looking at too. So whether it be to a river or to a constructed lake, those are the options that we'll be looking at.
You say a lake?
Yes, that's something we'll be looking at.
Really? Yeah, what about the people on the river or the creeks? Just let them out?
So that is part of what the next steps will be after we figure out how much we need to withdraw, is looking at the impacts downstream on whatever, if we're pumping in the river, what impacts will happen there so that we're not flooding out people downstream as a result, if that's what your concern is. Yes, yeah, so we definitely will look into that. Sorry, what was that again?
We gave house numbers earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't say how many houses flooded versus houses.
Just a second. He's got to bring a microphone to you so everyone. This way everyone can hear the question.
I was asking, since you're gonna flood the people on the creeks and the river, we want to know how many houses flooded in this area versus the ones that don't, that you're gonna make flood with this study.
So I don't think we have.
That little screen, you guys come to earth, down to earth, explain to us, so we can understand. Did everybody hear me okay? Yes.
Yeah.
Because I can't hear anything and understand anything they're saying. And I'm sorry everybody's facing the floods, I don't want that to be. There has to be a way to fix it.
So
You already know this study, don't exactly.
This is a little different because of the scope of the area. Before, we just focused on specific neighborhoods, the Hancock Acres neighborhood and the Peach Valley neighborhood. This one is that entire area, basically, that was outlined on one of the previous figures, so.
I think that's what we're understanding, what's different this time we want to do it.
Yeah, so that's partially it, and then partially, we looked at snapshots just to dewater specific areas, but we didn't look at the bigger picture last time. So getting that conceptual site model of that entire area and seeing how the groundwater flows through the whole area will help us so that we're not having to just kind of look at each specific little neighborhood that has issues over time. Does that make sense?
We don't see how many houses in this whole area have basements versus ones that don't have.
Do you want to take that one? Yeah.
If your question was how many houses in the whole area have basements, yes. We have received tables from the clerk's office that lists how many are partial, walkout, view out, 8-foot basements, or if they're just on a slab, or if they're a manufactured home. So all of that data is going to be incorporated into their study as to where those homes are. And from the study, what we may end up determining is maybe basements shouldn't be built in certain areas, or at least the bottom of the basement would have to be a certain distance above the historic high water table. And this could end up with future regulations that, I call them anthill homes, where they build up the earth so the basement's up above. That's part of the study. But we are getting that data, and when we worked with the residents who live in Hancock Acres, I know some of the residents there went door to door asking people, do you have water in your basement or not? And a map was created from that showing who did and who did not. Or if you did get water in the basement, did the sump pump take care of it, or did it just keep going up? So that will be part of the study that they're working on, is to incorporate that data. Okay.
Do you have any idea where you want to put this lake?
No.
Because you guys wanted to take from 83rd to 9th Street along the river and make a park. When it floods all the time, if it ever floods big, it floods there. And I've been down there, and it's over waist deep where I'm at.
Okay.
And you want to put a lake someplace, so when I go to take farmland,
The lake could be out of this area and water piped over to it.
and we're supposed to pay for that? Yeah.
Well, there would be a cost associated with it, and that's, every time I've done one of these studies, everyone has asked, well, why don't we just put a lake in somewhere? So that's going to be incorporated as to where is that somewhere, would it even work? Wait a second. We do have a microphone that can come around so everyone can hear the question. Oh. You want me to just finish this? Let me just finish this. Looking at the groundwater models would incorporate where the basements are and where they're not. Determine what options, how many dewatering wells, where would they be placed. Determine cost. We're also looking at grants and other funding options. I know Commissioner Lopez has been looking at economic grants that are out there for development. Because face it, if you have a lot of basement flooding, people may not want to build homes in the area, but if you can get rid of that, you could have economic development. So there's a possibility there. Several of us were at the governor's meeting today and the state's meeting on federal money coming into Kansas and how much is available. We're talking billions of dollars for infrastructure. So we're looking at different possibilities, not just a benefit or an improvement district, but are there other monies out there that could help in this project? So we're looking at that as well, not just what we've done in the past, because now the money's available. Whether we can get it or not is another question, but we're looking at that, trying to figure that out. We will have another town hall meeting after they finish the study. We asked you to sign in so we can make sure that you receive a notice of that meeting. We put this notice for tonight's meeting in the papers. It's been online. We sent out postcards. So I'm not sure, how many of you got a postcard? Great. That's good. And we got, again, the list of the addresses from the clerk's office on who owned property in the area. So I wanted to make sure that worked. Potential future steps, we could, like I said, get grant money, or that what I talked about earlier, benefit or improvement districts. And then when we put in the wells, no matter what, we would need permits from the Kansas Department of Ag, Division of Water Resources. They give the appropriation as to how much water can be pumped through dewatering. They're also the ones who give permits for the city of Derby and how much water they can pump and from where. And so we need to work with the state. We may need to get easements on getting the water out of there and running the pipe out of the area, and also where we put the wells. So there's some future steps, but the first step is getting the study completed. Now, when you came in, you were given comment cards. Here's my email, susan.erlinwine@sedgwick.gov, if you want to email me and ask any questions. Or I can give you my desk phone number, and you can call me. It's 660-7205. I also have cards up here I can give you. And this meeting was videotaped, and it will be on the website. Plus, we have on sedgwickcounty.org, ORG/environment, there's a link there where you can click on that and go make comments online and ask questions. And I will look at those and respond to those comments and questions. Or you can ask questions now. You can raise your hand and have a microphone brought to you. Or we could collect your comment cards and I can read them up here. Or you can leave the comment cards and I'll contact you with the answers later. So we have many options right now on trying to answer your questions. So, got a hand here and then one in the back.
Okay, so you're gonna do this, so basements of people's houses will flood. But you're gonna probably purchase out from other people that don't flood. To
Right.
make this lake or whatever.
That's where it comes in when you have to ask the people, have you had any flooding?
People over the other people.
I'm sorry, what was that?
You're gonna pick property over property. Same property because maybe has bought, you're gonna buy our property, government prices.
No. As I told,
It's not easy.
as I mentioned earlier with Peach Valley Estates and
Less government is good.
as I mentioned with the other two studies, they did not get 50% of the people to sign up to do this, go forward. Okay, there's a hand up in the back.
I was wondering if you could go back to the slide that showed the property value, estimated cost of what it would cost taxpayers to fix like the lake or the water costs. Can you go back to the slide that showed the estimated property value of the land or the property versus how much it would cost to fix everything?
Okay, on property values, the list clerk gave us, and by the way, this will be put on the website as well. The PowerPoint will be. The clerk will adjust property values due to flooding. And I know that you can't.
My question's gonna come after this. I was wondering if you could go to the slide that you presented tonight that showed the property value and the estimated cost that you're proposing.
The property values I presented tonight were from the clerk's office from about 3 months ago. So that's current property values. So if you took into account flooding, that would have been on there. If not, no.
She's looking for the value.
I'm sorry, so my point is.
I'm sorry. The echoing up
for
here.
reference, if you could go back so that
I'm sorry.
I can ask my question.
Thank you, Joan. Stand up here.
That's not she. She's looking for the pre-study. She's looking, there you go. Just pass it. She's looking for the valuation slide.
You want the evaluation slides?
So the slide that showed the property value versus how much is proposed that it would take to fix.
That one. This is the one you want.
Okay, so would it not make sense to offer us an out? That if we just wanted to get out of there, wouldn't it be cheaper to just buy our property and turn it into a lake if people wanted to? Can't we have that option? Or are we just kind of stuck?
I think all options should be on the table.
Okay. Sounds good.
I want to be clear, there is no project currently under consideration. This is a study to help us figure out if there is a project that makes sense and whether we should pursue that project. There's no buyouts, there's nobody buying it right away. There's nothing here but a study. But it's an important study because it's going to give us guidance going into the future where decisions could be made about does it make sense to do something, and part of it is. So the point tonight is to introduce, first of all, we've worked 2 projects out here in very small areas. So this is the first opportunity to talk to 800, try to talk to 800 property owners about the problem and what we're doing for a study. We'll come back with a full study and we'll have some options. That's not a design and that's not a project, that's just options that people can look at and say, you know, we're happy with it, or we need to try to fix this area or whatever. So I don't want to jump ahead to what the solution is. This is just a really important study because it's the first one to look at this whole area. And one of the things I think we get out of this, if you remember the model that Nicole showed you, the model that's producing this would be good for a long time. So it could be used to analyze any variety of options, you know, for a couple of years down the road. So that's the value of this, and that's what we're doing. So we're looking for feedback on, I think, are we missing anything here before we go ahead and try to finish this up? So.
That's okay. Wait 1 second. He has someone back there first. Okay.
My question is, how many homes in this area do you want to study?
How many what? Homes? If you look at the parcels, it's 1288. Active addresses is 984. So that means there's a home there to have an active address. So now that we don't know. That's part of the study.
You're gonna have any home traffic having a problem, and you want to spend millions of dollars to come figure out how many homes are actually having a problem. I've lived in this area for 15 years. I don't even get water myself. So I'm not having a
asked them who has a problem. Even if they have a problem or not, some people were not willing to pay the amount to fix the problem. So what that is, what we're looking at is the best we can in our homes have a problem in the area. And we're, just because we're looking at some area does not mean the water was put in the whole area. We have to look at where the problems are located, not just all of the wells everywhere. That's not the purpose. Wait, up here. She had her hand, we're ready to look at you, okay?
It's an echo.
Yes, I had a different question. It's, we don't have problems with water in our basement, but we have problems with the roads, the flooding of the roads when it rains. I lived in Gibson County for 20 years. We moved to Salem Township 8 years ago. We were on a dirt road in Gibson, we were on a dirt road in Salem. We were amazed at the difference in the road grading and the maintenance of the roads. Gypsums are wonderful. They have ditches on the sides of the roads. The roads are graded with a crown in the middle. There's no, when the road grader goes through, it's not leaving dirt on one side or the other. So the water drains into the ditch. It does not flood. And since I moved to Salem, the roads are lower than the fields. The farmers are basically encroaching on the ditch area. The county should have a easement there for a ditch. And there is no ditch. Now when they grade the roads, they leave about 6 inches or higher dirt on one side or the other. The water can't go anywhere but the road. We had one farmer who graded a ditch 2 years ago from the center of his field where there was water sitting to the road to drain his field into the road.
Okay.
We need to get the roads taken care of as well. If the roads were taken care of, we wouldn't have so much flooding in the area.
I know that Salem Township has talked to County Public Works in the past. The county has gone in and helped dig deeper ditches like along Hydraulic and down 103rd. Have you talked to your township officials about specific areas?
I tried to talk to them about a year and a half after we moved out there, and he said, oh, well, it's the difference in the ground. The ground in Gibson County is flooded, which it is. And he says, it's all the same here, we can't. And I'm going, what is the difference in digging a ditch? You have no ditches here. And I don't know what the problem is. I thought about it. I know that we were approached by a grader in Gibson Township. He said, I have to get the ditches out. I'm going to get the ditch in front of the property. You are the property owner here. Do you want the dirt that I'm taking on the ditch? Because then I don't have to pay to dump it somewhere else. I said, I'll take it. And then my husband said, talk to him again, tell him we'll take all the dirt you can. If other people don't want their dirt, rather than them having to pay to dump the dirt, we would take the dirt. We would do the same thing here. We need the ditches.
Okay. Talk to me afterwards about your location, and Public Works can contact the township and talk to them. I know the county has put on special training for township employees and how to properly grade a road, have the dome in the middle, as you mentioned. Unfortunately, employees keep changing and you don't know what the knowledge is passed on. So get with me afterwards and we'll look at your address in the road and see what we can do with the township. Okay. There's a...
Would you mind coming up here to the chapter so that we can refer to it too close?
had two questions. The first one wasn't covered, and I apologize. What is the latest of the study and the estimated time of completion?
We're looking at early fall for the completion. Yeah.
Okay. And then my second question, you mentioned for the Derby wells, they were decommissioning all the ones on Southbluff and building 3 new wells, correct? So what considerations have you taken in place for those 3 new wells? Is it just the water for Derby, or are they taking into consideration the groundwater study that they're doing now?
Part of it is a study, part of it is the state appropriations that have been given to the city of Derby that limits exactly where the wells can be placed. So they'll be looking at the state requirements and the appropriated amount. I think the key on the Derby wells is there'll be much fewer than in the past, and they won't be pumping as much as in the past. Because Wichita would be doing 90% of the winter required amount, and Derby's wells are kind of a fill-in the summertime when more water is needed. So to me, it's like someone mentioned earlier about the farmers when they're pumping their ag wells, it helps. That's dewatering. And if you get the wells close to each other and those cones overlap, that's going to help the house there. But as soon as they stop pumping, you've lost that advantage. But that's the way it's going to be with the Derby wells and with the farmers when they're pumping.
Okay, good. I'm sorry, I said 2 questions. That's the third one.
Sure.
When I did catch earlier, you showed the Hancock Acres. Did that not get passed? The proposal?
I'm sorry, what?
Did that whole study that went 4 years ago?
Oh, no, Hancock Acres, no. Neither one, no. And part of the problem, according to the people who went door to door, and when I say people, I mean residents who lived in Hancock Acres, they had heard rumors that Derby may be turning their wells on again and said, no, we're not going to do it because they were betting on the Derby wells, which you can see from that one map. Only 2 of the existing wells are still going to be there, and then 3 more will be added somewhere, they don't know where yet. And the pumping will be kind of when you don't need the water to be pumped because it's going to be in the dry time when Derby's will use the backup for Wichita.
I appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Someone down here.
I got one more question for you. Who's going to make the final determination if this is done or not?
Is your question that once we do the study, is that it?
I'm sorry, can you say that?
Okay.
Just want to know who's going to make the final determination,
Oh.
whether we make an improvement.
How do you want to handle that, Jim?
I'll do it.
Jim?
Oh, no. No, John.
I'll
So,
hand it over to my boss.
I'm Jim Weber, by the way. I'm the county engineer. We didn't do that earlier. Okay, Rebecca. So, I think what we would be looking at is there's no funding source in the county structure to go out and do these kind of projects. So that some of the improvements we've made down here, there's a storm sewer at 103rd and Hillside that went in. There's a storm sewer that starts at 83rd and hydraulic and goes over it. Susan showed me that one. Those were funded from the county general fund. But the general fund doesn't really it's not set up to do a lot of those, and we don't really have room for mega projects of this type. So for quite a while now, the thought would be, like we were working on the 2 prior projects, we put this together, we find out what the options are, we see what the interest is. It seems unlikely to me that there's ever a project that covers this whole area. It's very big, but maybe there's some spots where people are interested. The structure that we've used with the 2 prior projects is the structure I expect we would use, as it's a petition process. So if you have a solution comes out of this that makes sense for an area, then we would probably work with the people that would be affected, and it would be just like those. If it's worth doing, we're probably looking at a benefit district, which is a way to finance the improvements, and an improvement district, which would be a way to maintain and operate the system over the long haul. So I'm saying that decision gets made by the affected people for whatever makes sense out of what this study produces. And we just don't have the information.
I mean, are we gonna vote, or are you gonna have to decide to do the study? That's what I'm asking.
Okay, so I don't know that I have a full answer. We'll have a report, we'll make it available. We'll have information that people can go back and digest if they want to talk in their neighborhoods. We would treat it like any other paving project or a special assessment project that we might do in a neighborhood. We would see if a sort of critical mass of people are interested, and we would work with the people to try to figure out does it go forward or not. In the petition process, even if they had a 51% petition signed by people that said we want it, there's still a hearing required before the Board of County Commissioners. They decide whether the project goes forward. People that don't want to do it can come in and talk to the commissioners about what they don't like. People that want it can come in and support it. But I can't tell you there's a clean process. We've not gone into this and we're going to produce a solution and here's a project. What we know is we don't know enough about it. We studied 2 really small areas. We'll have a lot better information. We'll be able to reflect in the report what Derby's expecting to do, and should answer a lot of questions about what's happening out there. And then we'll just have to deal with people that are interested in solving a problem.
You guys work for us.
I'm sorry, what?
You guys work for us.
Yes, ma'am.
So whenever the people in the area need to be the ones in charge, that make the determination that we want this thing. Or is it?
Okay, I've said it in a really long way, but that's what I'm saying. You'll be in charge, because we're not going to pony up with millions of dollars to fix the problem.
If you want to decide out for this kind of thing, decide out for it, and if you know, no. And if your county commissioner is right back there, and she works for us, and she should do her vote, this is what we want. And this gentleman had a good idea, to make a lake or something, why couldn't you sell this water?
We've had that every time we've looked at it, and the problem is if you look, okay, I'm going to answer this and we got to move on. If you look at what's driving the cost of the 2 projects we've looked at in detail, it is the piping system out of it that really pushes the cost up. So you have to find somebody to sell water to that's close enough that you can afford to do it. Sorry, Susan.
I know your study's about groundwater, but should we also look at how the roads and the ditches are affecting the groundwater that we're having? I know in the area of 103rd, all the roads are underneath the sides of the roads. So watch out where we're going. Also, they just don't even have ditches.
Surface water.
Shouldn't have part of the study.
Surface water.
So the purpose, that's surface water, and that's also a problem. But the study is directed specifically at groundwater. I think, Senator Kirchen wisely tried to get some money lined up for us to try to figure out some solutions to the problem. Surface water definitely feeds the groundwater problem, but we've tried, honestly, it's difficult. We've spent a couple $1 million trying to move surface water out of there in storm sewers, and it's just also hard to do. It is so flat. Just can't move it.
Well, I know on the 103rd, and I talked to you about it, where they have the bridge for the railroad getting across. They only have a couple of ducts in there, very small. So the water's got nowhere to go over the road. That's when it becomes a real problem.
Yeah. Can we move on? I mean, I'll also say that whole intersection floods, and it's not just because of those tubes. Everything at 103rd and Hillside goes under with enough rain, every time. Here's why you need it. We're recording this for the other 600 people that didn't show up. All right, that's the answer.
I want to know why what we're talking about and why you haven't done any studies with any other cities that help. Why is it totally Derby?
Because Derby has the wells in this basin. No one else has wells in here besides your private domestic wells.
So this person who don't live in a Derby address, has to do with Derby's, whatever you promise.
I would just say Derby's not putting anything on you. Derby's water systems had water rights out there forever.
Yeah, but I just sold my property in Derby to the rest of them. And now you're going to do Derby again? I can't stand Derby. I shouldn't have to deal with those people at all. I sold my property.
Maybe we can talk after, because I'm not understanding your story. Yeah.
You said that we were talking about funding and proposals of funding, whatever, that it would be presented to properties that were affected. Have you determined what other properties besides Peachtree and Hancock are affected?
Okay, again, we are early in this process, so I would say the answer is no, but we're working our way through it.
Are you talking to residents, or are we doing a study of the groundwater?
Both. We would happily take, if you have had flooding in your basement, we would love it if you would email Susan and tell her what your address is and what your story is, so we can record that. We have trouble collecting this information of these kinds of firsthand accounts of what's going on. That would enhance what we're doing with the modeling work, the well data that we have, all the things that, the tools we do have to work with. It would just be good to be able to confirm with people that, this in fact is a home that has flooded.
So are you saying that?
Just a minute. Hold on.
One more question. Does the county, are they prepared to take responsibility for approving the housing additions for the basic sense of close to the water? As far as funding those projects that make sense.
That's a pretty legal question, which I'm not even going to attempt to answer.
Which what?
That's a very legal question that I'm not going to attempt to answer. On the advice of my attorney,
Can you not find out from the appraiser's office who has? Can you not find out from the appraiser's office who has basements in the area in question? And the next meeting that you have, I think we need to get a better cases.
The appraiser's office listed the type of basement, and we have that on the list so we can contact the people who have basements, yes.
You guys don't want a better PA system, so you can hear what they're saying? Understand it?
Hi Susan, it's true, because we were all in 2016, and we fought this. So my question is two parts. When are we expected to have a completion date? Because we can talk about comparisons and everything, we don't get resolved. In 2016, we fought this. And the other question is all this surplus water, why don't we sell it to Spirit? And then, I mean, we have plenty of professional people that, like Jeff Ryan maybe, or somebody like that, that take that water, sell it, and make money. Protect all of us.
okay, again, as far as sale of the water, you have to have somebody that wants it and has to make financial sense to ship it there.
Have you asked for approach anybody to buy that water? So I don't take it as investment.
Okay, so he's got a good point. You can't appropriate that water to sell it somewhere else. I mean, we got to work with all the water rights. What we're doing this is a very good point. What we would be doing if we were to do a well system, we'd be getting a right to dewater only when there was a flooding condition. We would not be getting a right to just pump water and sell it. It's two different things. So and every time we've had to put wells out, pumps out there, we've had to get a permit from the state to dewater. If we turn on Derby's wells, when we were able to do it on 10 and 11, we had to get a permit from the state to do that. It had a very limited time period and a limited amount of water.
First question answer the first question. You guys did this in 2016. We got another study in 2018. Here we are again with another study. When are we actually going to have the solution and stop debating all of it? I know that we have money allocated for situations like this. I swear we don't even
Okay. The earlier studies on very limited areas did not provide detailed information across this entire study that we're doing now. They're not really, we showed them to you to show you what we learned in those two studies, but they're not really reflective of this whole problem. And I've lost the second part of that, so I'm sorry.
Well, the point is, that's what we had in 2016 study, okay?
Right.
People didn't want to pay money because they want their funds. So why are we going to pay money when they don't? Okay, that's just miscommunication for them.
We've never miscommunicated that. We have always said that they're well.
I just say a lot of people it is. It's just information. Okay. So, where's the solution? You know, what's actually like where is paying money all around this? When we actually start to see a solution after
We can fund it.
There's two parts to this. You get a complete picture of what's going on, which is we're trying to do that now. And the second part, which I can't answer, is when it can be funded. There is no funding stream set up for this. There's no federal funding available for this kind of work with groundwater. There's no state funding available for this kind of work with groundwater. It literally has to be the local people that are impacted, potentially the county at large, some kind of system like that. And so it's a tough thing because it's expensive.
Yeah. Everything I think is whether it's guys to study or us trying to do things to keep the groundwater from acid. I think it's just very good. Okay, so Susan, how long have you been working in this real level?
2000, I don't know. Actually, I've been out there for 30 years dealing with people with groundwater problems.
Oh, early 1980s.
Yeah.
It's okay. So that's fair.
Hold on, I'm back here now.
You had said that we had flood issues with the email, Susan, right?
Sure.
Okay. Does something come out?
I think her staff would want to see what you had to say. I don't think necessarily need to come out and validate it somehow in your basement. If you say you had flooding, if you can tell us about how deep it got in your basement. I don't know, maybe in a final design phase, way down the road, maybe somebody wants to know exactly what the elevation was, we figure that out. But.
Well, the last time we were in these meetings, they said that we need to probably contact someone to see if maybe your taxes will lower because of the money you're spending. Because we've done our basement, we've done it twice, we're going to want it a third time. And so they wanted to come out and look at it, so they did, see that it was a mess. They raised our taxes. So I don't really want anybody to come back out because I don't want my taxes to go up again, but I'm willing to share, like, the money we spent and the time we spent on our basement by emailing her, but I don't want anybody to come out and raise my taxes again when my house looks worse than when I bought it.
So we're not connected to the tax system in that way.
I just don't, if I say there's something, and they say, oh, we're gonna send somebody out, I don't wanna do that.
We will not send the appraiser out. They're the only people that can change it.
But I'd be willing to share, but I don't want to come back to anybody and come below the price like that. And I'm Susie Webber.
Okay, thank you.
He's coming.
Let's go back and talk about this. You know, the deal is, the worst one these people out here had is we shut Haysville also shut. The worst problem we had was when we shut off the 100%. The other problem we had was the shut off Haysville. It wasn't just dirty, Haysville had wells in addition to it. And we didn't learn this till a couple years ago, 3 or 4 years ago when we had to be. So, you say you can't sell the water. What was the reason, straight up, for buying water from Wichita? It was cheaper.
So I'm Dan Squires, I'm Assistant City Manager in the City of Derby. The reason, first let me just point out that those wells pumped for 20 years, the basements were flooding. Okay. The other thing I'll point out is that Derby's water rights, what we can legally pump out of this area, is approximately a third of the appropriated water. If we're pumping our wells and the farmers aren't pumping theirs, there's no real benefit to that. The reason Derby went to Wichita for water, and at the time Wichita forced us to go 100% to Wichita water. We didn't have a choice of using our existing water rights and pairing it with supplementing with Wichita, which is kind of the opposite of what we're doing now. We are supplementing Wichita with Derby water. We're going back to that. When Mr. Weber was talking about appropriated water, there's different appropriations. You can do irrigation differently because it soaks back into the ground. Okay? The state appropriates water differently if you're diverting it to another use. So our water goes to the city and then it goes out the wastewater plant. We are appropriated, it was up on the slide, for 694 million gallons a year. That's the maximum. We were pumping way more than that. So you talk about dewatering, we're all kind of in a catch-22. The state thinks that this aquifer is over appropriated. So there's no, Derby would have loved 20 years ago to go to the state and said, hey, let us pump more. The state said, no, you're already pumping more than you're entitled to pump. So we had no choice but to go. Now, was the water quality in Derby bad? Yeah, I've lived in Derby since 1980. It was bad. But that wasn't the driver. We could have treated the water to a way higher quality and we'd have been financially way better off. But you can't just, there's a whole lot of regulation out there that fights what we're trying to solve here.
So was it cheaper for you guys like Wichita and whatnot that you sell? She said the pumps will wear out, the wells will wear out. If you went back and fixed all those, it cost no money.
No, not even close. Yeah. The driving factor in us going to Wichita Water was absolutely the fact that we had outgrown the rights that we had for the water that was available.
So one more question. Are you really thinking, or is this just something you're thinking about it, or are you really putting in this water?
So we are, but I don't want to give anybody false hope. We will be, we have negotiated with Wichita that they will provide approximately 90% of what we use in the wintertime. And the supplemental water, the peak water that people use in the summertime, Derby will provide 100% of. The problem with that, just like the farmers' wells, is that when people want that water is when it's not raining. And when the problem with the basements is when it is raining. So we will be pulling most of the water out at a time when it's not problem water for people who have basement issues. And I'll be here afterwards if anybody wants to talk to me about what our plan is. The first part of your question is it a real project? And the answer is yes. We are, it's in our CIP, it's under design. It takes years to facilitate the improvements and the approvals through the Department of Health and Environment to do that. But we are in the process of moving towards building a water plant and re-drilling wells and producing a percentage of our own water.
You just got to understand what I'm saying. And I want you to think about it, but it's a real problem. Just like they sit back there, we type in the basement, I don't know, down for free. It's not cheap, and we're city insurance, we're not government. So that's why they're really losing, because this thing went on for a long time. She said it's been going for 30 years.
Yeah.
But they feel like they ain't getting nowhere. Nothing's happening. We're doing a lot of talking and a lot of looting. But if they put it in the treatment plant, that's one set of progress. It's got to be done. They're not through. This should help some of those patients. Thank you.
Thanks. What time is it? Okay, it's almost 8 o'clock. We had the facility till 8. I appreciate you coming. If you have more questions, you've got my email. And if not, come up and I'll write it down for you. This will be on the county website, sedgwickcounty.org/environment. And then this slideshow will be posted also on the website, so you can get a better look at the slides. And if anyone wants to talk afterwards, we can talk a little bit, but like I said, we had a facility until 8 o'clock, and it's almost that now. So thank you so much for coming, and we'll keep in touch. We'll have another town hall meeting when the study is done and show it to you. And as Jim said, nothing happens without your permission. So keep that in mind. It's not we're just going to go in there and do something. Okay, we'll hang around for a little bit. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your attendance.